It's
The last period of Friday.
That?
Yeah.
That's a practice chanter. It's basically the business end of a bagpipe. You just take the bag out.
You played the bagpipe?
No, because they're not particularly well. That's why it's practice.
Do you play an instrument?
Yeah.
Because I heard you play, I used to hear you play something.
It's probably this.
Do you play it?
Yeah. But
Just play it like that.
well, the idea with the bag is it actually allows you to store your air reservoir and play longer. If basically, for instance, if I actually was playing long enough to take a breath, I'd have to stop blowing, and that stops the instrument, so it just stops the music. With the bagpipe, you just keep continuously circular breathing, and so the music continues the entire time.
Okay.
So that's why. But whenever you're learning how to play tunes, one of the things that's unique about bagpipes as opposed to other instruments, because you are continuously playing music, there's no way to do staccato notes. So, for instance, if you play a brass instrument or even some other woodwinds, you can do staccato notes and break up things to add emphasis and make music more interesting sounding. But with bagpipes, you can't do that. So you have to play grace notes, which is essentially a bunch of notes crammed into a smaller space. Or so. So to answer your question, I play about 6 or 7 instruments.
Wow.
So,
What do you play?
other than that, bagpipes, guitar really badly, the piano, trombone, the doumbek. It's an Arab drum. If you know belly dancing, it's what accompanies belly dancers essentially. I learned it because a friend of mine is a belly dancer and asked me to play it because she wanted her husband to do it, but he's kind of like musically antagonistic, I guess. He's like, no, I'm not playing instruments. So I was like, well, I can do it. I'm a drummer. So I played in a band for a long time. So, anyways. All right, so let's talk about the past 10 years, shall we? So you guys are 15, 16?
14.
14.
15.
14, 15, okay. So you guys were 4 or 5 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, yeah. 10 years in the United States. And what changes have you guys experienced, like, with changes in America, not like you personally? I mean, obviously a lot has changed for you, but what are things you remember being like, wow, that was different like 10 years ago? Yeah.
Technology?
Okay, how so?
Well, the cell phone, that's changed a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
Having a black president.
True.
What did you say?
Black president, first ever in the history of the United States. True. Anything else? Yeah.
They kind of snuck advertising in a lot better, in a way.
Yeah. It's all over the place, that's true. Sure. Because don't feel bad if you're like, I don't really know, because to be perfectly honest, like, my 4-year-old is pretty much aware of Paw Patrol and dinosaur chicken nuggets and like a variety of other kind of nonsense. I mean, oh, and Frozen, oh my God, Frozen. But the thing is that, yeah, she sings that, like, which is fun. No, the piano I have in my house is actually my wife's, and it's way old. It hasn't been tuned in God knows how long. We're going to move here at some point, so we figured why tune the 150-year-old piano. We're just going to have to move it and retune it when we do, so it's kind of, but it's still got ivory keys, like elephant ivory keys, so.
You could sell it for some money.
Yeah, but then it wouldn't be the family anymore. It's also a player without all the guts inside of it, so. Anyways, anyhow, there's a lot of things that have changed pretty dramatically in the United States in the past 10 years that really we can focus on and see changes. Probably the biggest one has been changes due to what's happened since 9/11. Because even though 9/11 is more than 10 years ago, it still has ramifications on the entire political spectrum today. Because of what happened with 9/11, we're dealing with ISIS. You know, a lot of the terrorist organizations out there operated because with the removal of Saddam Hussein from power, that left a power vacuum in the place. Somebody had to take control, somebody had to step in, and it was almost always jihadists and groups like that. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Why those groups? Why would they take control? And the answer is pretty simple. Because whenever you have a really bad economic situation, you know, war is a terrible time to try to have a stable economy, especially when it's happening in your town. You know, businesses can't operate when they're getting shelled and bombed and things like that. So that's a time when people get desperate and they just want some means of making a living, and also they tend to be pretty freaking angry. And propaganda is pretty high in a lot of these countries against the West with a capital W. Sort of the idea that this is a continuation of the Crusades, that we want to kill all Muslims, that we want to destroy all Muslims, and they have to fight against us to put an end to our aggression. And of course, they can twist it in all these different types of ways to make it sound like that. So, in essence, this cycle of war has been perpetuated. So, you know, this is something that has changed as our alliances have shifted. We have different situations, different places. Ending the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, yet at the same time, we're still involved in other places in the Middle East, dealing with ISIS, Syria. That's all events that can tie back to that. And also our everyday lives is affected by it because you have the TSA. I don't know if you guys have done any air travel lately, but the restrictions are pretty high now, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. I mean, that's one pretty major change that's occurred. Another one that you guys probably haven't really thought about is the economic situation in the United States. You know, yeah.
Oh,
Were you going to say something? Or I thought you said something.
I just know that the beginning of this year was a really bad, like, economic state. Like, everything plummeted.
Mm-hmm. A lot of that actually is China. China's collapsing, basically. Well, that's a strong word for it. They're in a recession. And we just are kind of emerging out of one. But the thing that's happened, essentially, is a lot of wages have frozen. So they haven't moved in 10 years, but the cost of living hasn't gone up. So what that means is everything's more expensive, but people are making the same amount of money. So that's to stretch it, yeah. In addition, the housing market went crash and is slowly rebuilding. Essentially what happens with that, economic principle, number one. What someone pays for something is what they're willing to pay for it. That seems like very obvious, yeah. I mean, if you're willing to buy something, that means you're good with the price of it. We might not be happy how much we're paying for it, but otherwise, if we're not willing to pay the price, we're not going to buy it. Now, why that matters. What you think something is worth plays largely into your perception of it. So, for instance, if you believe something is worth a lot of money, and so does everybody else, then a lot of people will pay money for it. That's demand, essentially. But if you don't believe that it's worth a lot of money, and you're not willing to pay money for it, and no one else is either, it becomes cheap, right? So in essence, again, look at diamonds. Diamonds are rocks. Shiny rocks, but they're rocks. And yet people pay tremendous amounts of money for them, don't they? Because we all just kind of think they're worth it, even though we could just as easily look at a shard of glass and say, that's really expensive. That's part of it. There's more to pricing than that, but that's kind of a rough outline of it. So let's talk how this affects houses. People have been buying houses that were expensive, and housing kept going up and up and up. Banks were loaning money to people who couldn't actually pay for the mortgages. And so in return, they were essentially, you know, having a house for a little while, losing it to the bank, and the bank would resell it to somebody else. What happened, though, is so many people lost their houses so fast, and there were so few people willing to buy them that the housing industry collapsed. People's houses suddenly weren't worth near as much as what they paid for them. You might have heard of someone being under on a house, owing more than it's worth. That means that if they were to sell it right now, they would get less money for it than what they originally paid for it. Does that kind of make sense? So, housing has been kind of on the recovery in the United States lately, and has been doing pretty well, but for the most part, it's been kind of on the decline. Now, here's an interesting question. What about crime? How bad is crime in the United States now as opposed to 10 years ago? It's actually the safest it's ever been in the history of the United States. This is according to the FBI and the CIA. Why would you say it's worse? A bunch of people are getting shot. That's bad. How do you know about that? News, right? Where are these people getting shot? Where are these people getting shot? Where's it happening? Yeah, kind of. You hear about it. Well, it's happened over here, happened over there. How about in Louisville? How many people have gotten shot in Louisville in the past year?
It's like first murder in Louisville. Recently, they had their first murder in Louisville.
Yeah. Basically, last year, I do want to say it was in the 60s, compared to like the population of Louisville, that's really freaking low. Crime's at an all-time low in the United States, but we believe it's not because of the media. It's not necessarily the media trying to like scare you intentionally, although to some extent it is, because people are scared, they pay more attention to the media, which means they get more revenue from advertisements. But it also has to do with the fact that you are more connected today than any other person in history has ever been. I guarantee it. I can ask you any question right now with your devices open and say, find me the answer to this, I guarantee you'll find it. You know what I'm saying? I got it. We can. Well, we're not going to do that. It's a waste of time. I was going to say I was going to give you a random word. You go find it and see how long it takes you, but that's stupid. It'll just find you in a second. So, but you understand, technology, as you guys are saying, has changed dramatically, and that means that life is changing dramatically in the United States. Technology has many effects on us that we can't necessarily always predict, but at the same time has made life much easier in many different ways. But that also means we are inundated with information. We can get information anytime from anywhere, but what's happened is you now also have more power of what type of media you consume. Used to be, you pretty much had like 3 news channels on television, you had a couple newspapers you could pick from, and that was it. You were stuck otherwise. Now just hop on your tablet or smartphone, you can get news from any source you like. In general, what happens is you're going to pick a news source that kind of agrees with your opinions, because news sources are, for the most part, biased. You know what I'm saying? They tend to lean one direction or the other, either be politically or even just how it's written. There's a lot to how media is actually put together that kind of likens it to the way people think. What this means is that people who are conservative have become more conservative. People who are liberal have become more liberal, and it's contributed to the polarization of the country, meaning that there's not really any people in the middle ground much anymore. People can't really find the middle ground and work together as easily in the government, and that makes it very difficult to get things done. Does that make sense? The media has contributed to that. So technology has not only changed what we do, but how we think. Does that make sense? Okay, so just to summarize, we've talked about 3 major changes in the United States thus far. Number 1, we talked about the situation in the Middle East that began since 9/11 and all the changes that have occurred. We mentioned the TSA, we mentioned how, ISIS has risen and all these other things like that. Number 2, we discussed the economy, how we've just kind of come out of this recession, things have changed, how the housing market crashed, how standard of living has basically gone down because the cost of living has gone up and wages have frozen. And thirdly, and also crime, how that's actually on the decline. And thirdly, we talked about how technology has changed, and that was with crime, talking that sort of thing. How our media has fed us this belief that it's worse when in truth it's better, and also how it's contributed to the polarization politically of the nation. Okay? Got it? Now, you might remember one of your essays had to do with what changes have occurred in the United States in the past 10 years. And how many examples did I tell you need to have in an essay? And I just gave you. I'm just saying, that's a thing to talk about. All right, that is it for today, guys.